it's this combination of like financial situations being so much more questionable and uncertain with this like racial sort of social political resurgence that's been going on. And I think the crossroads between those two has made people that much more aware of the fact that they probably sit within a niche or could be better serving a smaller community of maybe more disadvantaged people. And I think, that intentional sort of approach to shopping is really going to change how like bigger players in the space kind of present themselves, but it's also going to give smaller players in the space who potentially see an opportunity for themselves to actually thrive.
I was thinking, as you know, of calling this show Niche is the New Broad. And what I mean by that is that it seems like brands more and more are talking about niche audiences and considering niche audiences. And on one level, you might wonder why. There's arguably there is less ROI. And so I wonder, what is it that's making brands attend to niche markets so intently? And I thought we would do a show about that. And I have the perfect guest for that. Her name is Amber Kazalbash, and she's a senior strategist at RGA. So welcome, Amber.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about all the good things around niche.
So what happened? Like, it used to be so easy, at least back in my day when I kind of first started out. It was like, find the lowest common denominator, biggest, broadest reach, and go, And why do you think at a top level will be, brands are attending more to niche markets?
I think it's a combination of a few things, but I think the main high level point is that there really is no common denominator anymore. Everybody is so individual and everybody has access to, some of these really key communication points through digital that expression of oneself is so much different than in years past where we were more able to group people together. And because of that, we're really coming to see that the way people behave is so individualistic and personalized. And so brands essentially can't treat them that way anymore. And so that, with the combination of, the things that are being expressed by people being so different and so individualized, it just clearly shows that there's more, especially this year, more need for a connection than ever before. So I think, we're at a really interesting time right now where all of this is kind of coming to light, coming to the fold. But I think it actually poses a huge opportunity for not only brands who are marketing to people, but for people to connect with one another.
What a great answer. I had not thought about that aspect of Gen Z, right? Not that it doesn't apply to other generations, but as soon as you said it, I was like, that's what all our research on Gen Z indicates, is that there's this intense, need to really narrow down on who you are specifically and patch it together out of the things that you love, And so it makes sense that there isn't really a broad audience anymore. So there we go. So tell me, what does a senior strategist do these days at RGA? What is your role like and what do you love about it?
So I started at RGA about a year ago, and even throughout the course of this year, I've seen so much change and growth within the company itself. I was hired on as a brand strategist, and for me, that meant, really helping advise on, different steps that the company can take, whatever client I was working with, to reach the market, approach the market and its consumers in a new and fresh way. What I've come to learn is that there's no true singular approach to strategy. There's so many different combined components, whether it's the brand component, which is what I initially envisioned myself really working in, or this, social component of conversing with audiences and really connecting with them at a deeper level. And then this whole experiential component of making sure that audiences and consumers feel really closely connected to not only a brand for, the essence of what it is, but also the product that they provide and the experience that they provide. So my role has been really interesting. I primarily work with Michaels, which is a craft retailer, and just seeing the way that this legacy sort of retailer that's got, hundreds of locations, I even think it's in the thousands, has really changed. Just shows that there's so much more of a focus for strategists like myself to be focusing on learning about people, but also learning about people in the context of how the world is changing. So that's kind of how I distill what my job really is. I'm constantly keeping a pulse on not only, how the consumer base is changing or their habits are changing, but how the world around them at a greater level is affecting those changes, and really communicating those into insights that not only just uncover what they're saying or how they're saying it, but what those things really mean, and helping clients kind of keep a pulse on that throughout the course of time.
That's a lot of stuff to do. Like,
Yes.
I wonder what kind of background do you have, that brought you to the different skill sets that would allow you to perform in that way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm really lucky in that my career really started to pick up around the time where social media was becoming a more normalized sort of entity in the digital space. And so naturally, as someone straddling between millennial and Gen Z, that all kind of came naturally to me, and I saw an opportunity to like productively pursue that in my career. So for me, it's been partly just learning, keeping up with the times, and being extra communicative on these channels that are available for everyone, I should say. And then it's also partly some of like the more formal education that I've kind of taken in the course of time. I worked briefly in the software space. I spent some time at Eisenberg working in tech with you guys.
I should have done one of those. You hear it on NPR where they're like, "We need to disclose that Amber Kazalbash actually worked here at one point."
Right. So I've got a little bit of experience from that piece of the world, but even at a personal level, just exploring social media, I was able to, over the course of my career, also develop somewhat of an influential presence online within a niche as well. So all of those things combined have really helped me understand these different components and how they play together. And thankfully have gotten me to a place where I can kind of differentiate myself when I am speaking to clients and kind of sharing my perspective with the background that I have.
Yeah. How do you think, by the way, about that niche that you're in? I'm aware of it because I follow you on LinkedIn and other platforms. And so I would probably say, Amber focuses a lot on Muslim women and Muslim women's issues. But how do you think of it? What is the niche that when you just referred to it, that you're referring to?
Yeah, the summation statement is, my background clear and cut dry is that I'm a Pakistani American, second generation Muslim woman. I don't lead with that, but I do think that a lot of, the kind of context of my background influences the way that I see the world. And I think, especially as a marketer, it's important to really root into your personal experience to shed light on new opportunities and to, give companies or corporations a perspective on new and untapped markets. So that's, something that's always in the back of my mind. I'm obviously, like I said, somewhat of a person of influence within this niche as well. And so I'm very much active in it. I'm very much a part in it. And I've also begun to see a lot of like trends that occur within this particular niche. And for me, that was kind of like the moment of awakening that helped me realize that, this isn't only occurring within my little bubble. There are so many little corners of the world or pockets of the internet that are starting to pose new market opportunities too.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I find that it really, embracing your identity and discovering the different nuances of it and then bringing it to your work can really power you up and power the team that you work with up, because it gives you a specific kind of passion and foundation yourself. And then it also becomes this, wonderful influence on a team that is inevitably, a mix of people from different backgrounds. So I think it's makes sense that you would have a focus there. I want to talk about Michaels a little bit. First of all, what a great brand. Like, even as you mentioned it in the context of your entry into this chat, I thought about walking the aisles in Michaels and how many different types of people I see. There's grandmothers and men and women and people of all genders. And it's a particularly diverse audience, I bet. But I guess we maybe start with, how does Michaels think about their own business and their own mission?
Yeah, so it's been interesting. I think over the course of the past few years, they've internally begun to see the offering that they provide as something a lot more unique than your traditional legacy retailer, as I'd mentioned before. To your point, like the consumer base for Michaels is so diverse, and I think they're just starting to get a sense of the different ways in which they can slice and dice to connect with these people more deeply. And it's interesting. Michaels is, one of those companies that everybody knows the name, and it's just for Michaels, it's just been a matter of like, how can we engage people further so they really feel connected to the company, not as just a store that you can go to because it's around the corner, but as a brand that people identify with. And so, in my time working with them, that's really what we've been charging towards, like really understanding not only, what consumers are expressing when they visit a store or they tag, Michaels online or they create something of their own, but also understanding what the needs are behind that and starting to proactively serve those, I think is really the direction that the company is trying to move in. So it's been a really interesting time working with them in particular because they're like highly cognizant of the fact that even in the past year, things have changed so drastically in the space of creativity and crafting and all of that. And so we've been working with them on like really finding ways to get more personal, more emotional, and truthfully less transactional. Obviously, this is what you would consider a large scale retailer. And so sales are like a huge piece of the puzzle. But, testing and experimenting to see how you can move from being so transactional to being more relational and emotional is, I think, what has really been at the forefront of some of the stakeholders that I work with's minds. So it's been interesting. It's a little bit of dipping your toes in the water and then seeing, how all of this plays out. But over the course of time, we've really started to rev the engine and find ways to connect more deeply with consumers. So it's been really cool.
So actually, I understand there's a new campaign in market called Made by You. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about, well, first of all, when did that hit market?
Yeah. So Made by You has kind of been on the sort of back end of the engine, starting to rev up since my time starting at RGA. So last fall is really when we started to kick off thinking and creative ideation around it. But the gist of the campaign is, to my point earlier about being more emotional, connecting more deeply with people. We started to look in the insights around creativity and making and, this whole movement of people who just want to like express themselves past, ways that they had in the past. And so what we found was that essentially people are really good at making on their own, but they don't really have a clear sense of community. And so we saw an opportunity for Michaels to essentially cover that ground, cover that white space, and be that partner for people and connect this community of, siloed individuals. As you'd mentioned before, there's so many different types of makers and creators out there. So what we've been doing throughout the course of the campaign is highlighting and spotlighting different makers who are so passionate about what they do and really making them the forefront of the entire campaign. No hired talent, no excessive scripts. We're really just organically letting these makers tell their stories. And so, within the first couple of months of launch, which happened to be around the time of COVID, we really saw, a significant difference in how people were perceiving the brand just because the stories that were coming out with this campaign were so much more authentic.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Wow, it hit right as COVID was beginning.
Yeah, literally within the same 2 weeks of stay-at-home orders.
Oh my God!
Which was wild.
I want to come back to that, but yeah, it strikes me. It's a really it's a strategy that really resonates with me right away as I think about my experience as a customer. And the great thing about Michaels is there is so much stuff, right? There's feathers and beads and flowers and fully assembled stuff and kits. And right. I find that in this COVID era, I am defaulting to purchasing a lot of stuff online. And of course, I'm sure Michaels has a huge online presence as well. But it's easy to kind of fall back on Amazon and just search feathers. So by creating an identity that is bigger than that and a feeling and an emotional space that's bigger than that, I can see that would be the way that would make me. And I think after this show, I will always search Michaels. So, but let's go back to that the COVID thing. So. Yeah. So did you have to make a huge adjustment, hitting market with something that you've been working on from fall? bringing it to market in March? Like, maybe we should back up for a second, just talk about what is the process at RGA or for Amber of strategy. Like, how do you approach it normally?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, I think I'll get to this point later, but essentially the work that we had done in preparation for this launch was not necessarily like majorly changed, but rather like accelerated because of some of the habits that we saw coming out of COVID. But typically our process is when we, are onboarding or trying to find a new platform or campaign is to just really do like a landscape analysis of consumer, company, competition, culture, all of these different really important sort of peripheral pieces, and come to a summation or distillation of what that means for either the brand purpose or, a new area of opportunity. And so that's really like where I have a heavy hand in very early on in the creative process. And then I continue to kind of work alongside creative people and people on the experience strategy side to really develop what that full blown, not only marketing, but like actual digital experience looks like. So with Made by You, it was clear early on that it was just about like really establishing that sense of partnership and community after coming out of that landscape exercise. And then from there, we were able to really lay out, how we were going to pay off that partnership. So when COVID came around, a lot of the things that we saw kind of in like a timeline perspective coming after launch, we really had to start thinking about how we can start obtaining those things more quick and more nimbly. And that ended up being more on the operational side of things, curbside delivery, contactless payments and things like that. But from a communications perspective, we definitely had to revisit some of our, hero spots and pieces to see how we could, address a little bit more of the sensitivities around security and safety and feeling empowered while you're still at home. So, there was some adjustment from that perspective for sure.
It's cool, like, because I was as you laid it out because the way that you think about it, I was thinking, well, the big C that changes, right, is culture, right? You must have been looking at, okay, the culture is just about to totally change. But on the other hand, where you were headed with cultural insights for this brand at this time was very much about like some ideas that COVID drove us toward about, home nesting and finding connection between people. You like these qualities that is where COVID was driving us anyway.
Right. Yeah, and I'm thankful from that perspective because, this idea that a brand can connect more deeply with people, I think has been heightened even more in the course of time while we've been, hopefully everybody staying at home safely. Like we're longing for that much more connection than we had in the past. And so, timing actually happened to be immaculate from that perspective. We were really able to just adjust ourselves and highlight those key points so that people felt like we were coming from a really true and authentic place.
So did you end up having to like make any special new assets or make any, I know you said it's the exception to the rule, but did you do anything differently?
So for the most part, we kept the launch assets the same. What we ended up doing was we created one net new asset, which was a little bit of a scramble because things were changing so quickly, but we didn't know what direction the next few weeks in the first kind of leg of COVID was running towards. So essentially what we did was we repurposed some of the visuals and storytelling from the actual hero assets of the campaign. And we included some additional language around safety, security, and essentially buying what you want and still being able to make it home into another asset that was used to kind of seed the actual launch itself. So that hit right when stay-at-home orders came out. We had, like I said, a really quick turn for that piece. But the insight behind it was still the same in that we wanted to show people that we were here for them. We wanted to show makers at the forefront of it. And then it was a really nice kind of kickoff place for us to then launch the rest of the content, involve a lot of our hero makers and influencers, and then just roll out more organically.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was thinking about it. Like, I want to talk about what we kind of set out to talk about, the niche market idea.
Sure.
And it might be like a bit of a stretch, but I wonder, you can either go there with me or just ignore it and just get into niche marketing. But like, it does strike me that in a way, COVID is a bit of a training ground for brands on how to approach niche marketing, in the sense that in a really intense way, it got us focused on what are people feeling? What are the real conditions of their life? How can we connect with them in an authentic way and provide them what they really need, as an action right now? And those are all kind of things that are qualities of, good niche marketing. So I wonder, maybe as a starter, if you could define for us. You used a couple of terms when we were bouncing around, shaping up this episode, interest-based and mindset-based, which are kind of synonyms, I think, for niche, and maybe better and more descriptive. But how do you think about those two terms, and how do you use them?
Yeah, no, I think you're right on the mark. It's really just a matter of evaluating personal experience, right? Like, every customer, similar to what we were talking about earlier, every person has their own background, has their own experience. And so when I say interest-based and mindset-based, I'm kind of talking about two sides of the same coin. Essentially, interest-based is, the voluntary stuff, the stuff that excites you, the passion points that are in your life, the ways that you choose to connect with people. The mindset-based piece is the more involuntary stuff, when the world around you seems to be crumbling and all you're looking for is some safety, some security, some sense of connection. These are like, those more internal motivators. So the combination of, the two of those and understanding those more deeply is a very powerful thing. And I think, when we talk about brands really connecting with people at that level, and COVID being like the perfect sort of testing ground for that, you see that, each individual with this combination of interest-based and mindset-based has still a very personal experience, even though there is this kind of collective sort of summation that we can say for everyone, which is we're all just trying to figure it out as we go. So, relating to these people very seamlessly has already been a significant challenge for brands, even in terms of like, the output of their content, the fidelity of their content, but also like the anticipatory nature of like really understanding what those personal experiences are, is, I think, truthfully, something that brands still have yet to crack today. So I tend to talk about it from that perspective because I think it gives, other marketers or colleagues a really interesting lens into what it means to be more personalized and more human when connecting with a consumer. And when you think about like, even the difference between you and me, our interests and mindset, the combination may result in something similar, but because we have such a different personal experience and background, there's so many different connection points that a brand could use on each of us to connect with us in a deeper and more, I guess, personalized way.
Yeah, I think it's so. I want to drill down a little bit on the point that you're making about being anticipatory, because I think it's a nuance that I feel like right now, and I'm not by any means against it because it's really important, but, everybody's talking about authenticity. Oh, we got to get authentic. We got to get authentic, So for sure, I'm interested in your point of view if you have a fresh one on, how do brands get authentic. But I also wonder, you have a really... You've mentioned to me several times this notion of being anticipatory, and I think that's a really interesting insight as well.
Yeah, I think for me, like, authenticity stems out of being able to successfully be an anticipatory provider. And for brands, sometimes that just essentially means that you need to get out of your typical things that brands do, if it's like on the representation side or, all of these great things, I think, are important things that marketers need to build into what they're doing. But I think if they take it a step past that and really start to root these insights into the actual culture behind the brand, the product that the brand is putting as an output, that demonstrates to me as a consumer that you actually are listening to what I'm saying and you're anticipating what I'm actually feeding back to you in so much more of like a deeper rooted way. And so, there are a lot of players in the space that are really trying to get there. And, some of the top players always find a way to get there more than others. But what I have noticed is that those who are closer to a niche are doing a lot better job of it because they're living and breathing that niche. And so it's a huge takeaway, a huge lesson that, corporations who have much larger scale can learn from.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's also one of the drivers of, for those of us that are big, supporters of diversity and equity and inclusion.
Yeah.
It's one of the big drivers, because if you look at the metrics, that we're talking about, the subject that we're talking about today, you can improve the foundation of your business fiscally by being able to reach segments in an authentic way. But to reach them in an authentic way, you need to have them represented on your team. And so to have them represented on your team, you need to have programs and policies that are designed to recruit and create a really, integrated team. So I like it because it actually, I just think that's good for the world anyway. So, let's get really nuts and bolts about, it sounds like there are opportunities for businesses that are smaller and startup around interest-based and mindset-based markets. And then there are opportunities for businesses that are huge and service a very broad audience to start thinking about how they also can service segment by segment. So let's take the first one. Is, what do you think are some of the important ways that interest-based marketing creates new opportunities for small businesses and startup businesses and things like that?
Yeah, I think it's such an important place to start too, right? Like the whole landscape is basically flipping over, where, corporations are kind of just keeping in track with the things that are happening in the grassroots, but it's really what's happening in the grassroots that's informing so much else that's going on in the world. So I think niche is like the most important place to start. And what I've seen is, from my little corner of the internet, my little bubble, is that, interest, particularly for minorities, people of color, people with distinct or diverse backgrounds, are kind of starting to bubble together and kind of coalesce and connect over their connection points. And new sort of needs are forming based off of that. One example I can share is in the peaceful and mindful space. When we think about what is now Headspace or Calm, or even extending to beauty brands like Glossier, this all started from people just wanting to really just get back to basics and find some sense of clarity in the world. And so even though these people don't all look and feel the same, they share these same interests and mindset around just finding some semblance of serenity in their lives. And it's extended into these different niche sort of companies and pockets. And I love that example because, 5 years ago, wellness was kind of hard to tread. We didn't really understand what it meant, but it started as such a grassroots level thing and blew up into something that now it is really its own entire market, not only from a product perspective, but the way that people are changing their language and conversing with one another. And I love that because out of that niche, we've reached the sort of baseline of where we're at today. But out of this new baseline that's developed, we're probably going to start to see other niche pop up as well.
Yeah, that's a great example. And another one that it made me think of, and I'm doing this kind of on the fly, but you inspired me to think about where I'm doing niche shopping. And an interesting one is that I've been working on doing a lot of reading on just Black Lives Matter and the history of Black people in this country. And as part of that, I started to think about, well, I could really help the entire growth of this space by making my purchases from a Black-owned bookstore. So by being a Black-owned bookstore, not only were there bookstores that were of service to me, but I was able to go and target them. And, I would presume that that's happening. I'd like to see the long-term metrics. I hope that's happening for Black-owned bookstores all over the country. And it's just an example of sort of, if you can carve out a niche, you're there when that niche is needed.
Yeah, totally. And I think this year is such a great example of consumers like revisiting the way that they're purchasing, like just how you said, it's this combination of like financial situations being so much more questionable and uncertain with this like racial sort of social political resurgence that's been going on. And I think the crossroads between those two has made people that much more aware of the fact that they probably sit within a niche or could be better serving a smaller community of maybe more disadvantaged people. And I think, that intentional sort of approach to shopping is really going to change how like bigger players in the space kind of present themselves, but it's also going to give smaller players in the space who potentially see an opportunity for themselves to actually thrive. So I'm excited for everything from that perspective. I know it's really hard to like look at the ongoings of this year and like remain positive, but I do think that, the combination of those two will eventually turn into something bigger. As I said before, we saw it with wellness, people were starting to become more intentional about those types of purchases. But now with, social and political justice being so much more at the forefront of people's mind, being intentional about giving back to these, minority or different background groups is, I think, at the top of everyone's mind today, for sure.
Yeah. So let's jump to that other category, and what do you think larger brands should be considering as they have this broad audience and this broad reach, but they start to think about wanting to connect with interest-based or mindset-based audiences, because of course we've seen some big blow-ups there. So how do you do it right, and what's the reasoning behind it?
Yeah, it's such delicate territory to tread because with larger corporations, obviously there's just so much more red tape and like more complexities to figure out. I think, the most important thing is that a brand stays listening. And I think, the Nikes of the world do a really good job of this. I come from my own little pocket of the world, as I said a couple of times in this chat, but like, for me personally, seeing Nike kind of evolve to suit new needs, not only for like consumers, but for women specifically, has been really interesting for me. And to my point earlier, it's really started to bleed into not only the things that they're saying, the ads that they're putting out there, but their actual products themselves and how they're serving those products. So a couple of years back, they did something really interesting where they created a hijab just specifically for audiences who were potentially of a more modest background, potentially, of a Muslim background, and creating athletic wear for that specific niche. And that was just such a monumental moment. I actually remember I was working at Eisenberg at the time, and I was chatting with a few people in the strategy team about how the reflection of a product being built off of a niche is still so novel and still something that hasn't really come to the forefront just yet. And seeing them adapt that sort of methodology over the course of time has been really interesting. So that was like kind of the start of which I started to see that roll out a little bit more. And then just within the course of the past year, they've done even more of that. I think it was like December, January timeframe. They did a really interesting launch where they were listening to athletes outside of, the States and kind of the West, if you will, and listening to the concerns that female athletes had from, the clothes that they were wearing outside of covering their hair. And so they built an entire swimwear line that was directly, the products were directly built off of, the feedback that was being given by athletes. And so that sort of loop or listening sort of curve between the brand and what consumers were actually saying, to me, proved that, a corporation of that scale can, do it right if they are directly taking inputs from the consumers that are starting to come to the fold a little bit more. And I could just go on and about Nike, but those are just, a couple of examples that I think are super interesting that have been happening pretty recently.
Yeah. I mean, there is something that sparked for me in what you said was obviously, we're very focused on the idea of listening, but I think sometimes we even have to remind ourselves, that when we say, at Eisenberg, we say listen, then create, then share, then listen again. And even as people that are really focused on listening, and we tend to, place the main responsibility for that listening to some degree inside of strategy. What I sparked on there was an idea, which was like larger companies should really like have a chief listener.
Yeah,
Like
so true.
because it is strategy, but it's also like you could get lost in all the other parts. We already have strategy and marketing science, right? Breaking down into our researchers and our analytics people and, the strategists who put it all together. And in a lot of places, it's, people trying to wear all those hats.
Right.
But if at the foundation, listening is that important, it would be so interesting to see what happened if you had someone just responsible for listening.
That's so true. Yeah, and I think it's like, the active listening is something that should be done by everybody who's participating in building a brand or building a company. But the discipline of listening is something that is so unique and so continuous that it really is in of itself its own whole job or discipline itself. And I think like for corporations that have a larger scale and have the resources to do that sort of listening, it's almost like, a no-brainer to start doing it now, or at least infuse it into everything that, the departments that are working on it start to do. I think the key area that has been sort of a misstep is to only rely on social or to only rely on, feedback from stores or, physical store locations. I think there also has to be an element of like proactivity, to my point earlier about being like really anticipatory and like really getting yourself out there as a brand. And I think part of the reason why I say that is because when I worked in the software space, I worked primarily in like the little bubble of product marketing. And you'll see that like in tech, they approach it very differently, where the only way your product will be built or your brand will be built is if you have really done the due diligence of understanding what a consumer wants and needs. And I think oftentimes a lot of that can get lost in translation with social, even though social is a really great wealth of information to start. But it's really about, again, like I said, putting yourself out there as a brand and establishing that really cut feedback loop so that everything in addition to social starts feeding back into.
So, you've mentioned a couple times the part of your identity that is a Muslim woman. And I just wondered, since we kind of have wandered down near there, you're kind of already doing this anyway, but, what can you tell us about the kind of state of brands right now as far as your perspective as a Muslim woman customer?
Yeah, I'm a little torn. I mean, the strategist in me always remains a little bit skeptical. So oftentimes what I see is, brands are really becoming keen to optics and representation, which is great. I mean, it's always awesome to see people who I identify more closely with represented on screen. And so it's been really nice to see, brands of all different scale across all different verticals really start to embrace what one version of the Muslim identity looks like. I think for myself, as a woman who doesn't cover her hair or lives within sort of just part of the spectrum of what a Muslim person can look and live like, it's been interesting for me to start to uncover in the back of my mind, like, where else would I like to see myself represented? And I think, the fashion space has been a really interesting sort of view into that, because there have been influencers who have come about in the past few years who have really started to talk about what it means to be a Muslim woman and show and demonstrate what that lifestyle really looks like and build that relationship with brands. But I still think, from the perspective of media and music and even, different industries, like I hardly meet someone who has the same background as myself. I think to this date, I haven't actually met someone who identifies the same way. So, there's still a lot to be done, but I think we're really just starting to crack the surface. And what's really exciting to me is that I can really start to see how, when a brand does showcase openness towards different people of different backgrounds, myself being Muslim, it's really just a matter of demonstrating an authenticity that could potentially connect with someone who doesn't identify with being Muslim, but has similar sort of values and interest as we were talking about before. And so that's something that I'm really excited about. A modest piece of clothing as that Nike line showed, is very much a relevant product and brand for a Muslim woman, but there are also people who have skin sensitivities or are, a little bit more modest in the way they dress naturally, who can also start to gravitate towards that. So I'm really loving the idea that niche marketing is even going to get that much more niche, and companies are going to be able to serve a lot of different needs by just thinking a little bit more outside of the box.
Yeah, totally. I can tell you, that's very hopeful, right? Like we talk about these times are often not filled with hope. But, as a white man, who is not practicing any religion, I look at that choice and I am inspired that we're making human progress. Like I remember when that campaign hit, I shared it out all over the place simply because as a human, I'm like, go humans, yay,
Yes.
And so, and that's important, right? That's important for if we have that opportunity in our work as marketers to create that feeling. And Nike does that a lot, there are a lot of great. Microsoft is actually doing that a lot now, I think thanks to Satya Nadella,
Right.
So it's great to see. And I'm sure Michaels will be doing that soon as well.
We're cooking up some things, so I'm excited about that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's so great to catch up with you again.
Me too, yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful insights. I think there's a lot here for people that watch the show to really dig into and take the next step with. So thank you.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, it's been so interesting to over the course of these past few months, really just set everything aside and reflect on this crazy point that we're at in time. And I know everybody talks about it in this way and it's probably getting a little old now, but it really is a pivotal moment for all of us. And I'm really thankful to be able to have these types of conversations with you and just catch up with you and kind of, rethink what the next chapter is going to be. So definitely hopeful for all of that.
Okay. Well, have a good day.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Listen In. You'll always find us streaming on LinkedIn, along with live chat comments from myself and guests. After the stream is over, we archive the show here on our LinkedIn page for Eisenberg, and you'll also find the episodes at AListDaily.com. So have a great week, and as always, keep your ears on.